What if I told you that a philosophy, which has been misunderstood for centuries as just, the simple pursuit of pleasure, has actually profoundly shaped our modern world and even the founding principles of the United States? Well, today, we're going to uncover the real story of Epicureanism.
So picture this, it's 1819, and Thomas Jefferson, the guy who literally wrote the Declaration of Independence, drops this bombshell in a letter. I too am an Epicurean. An Epicurean? I mean, for most of us, that word brings up images of crazy feasts and just unrestrained indulgence. So what on earth could one of America's founders have meant by that?
And that's the big question we're digging into here. To get to the answer, we have to peel back about 2,000 years of misrepresentation. We're going to rediscover a philosophy that's way more subtle and honestly far more influential than its popular reputation would have you believe.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start with Jefferson himself. Then we're going to travel all the way back to its roots in ancient Athens. We'll look at how its core ideas got totally twisted and lost, how they were brought back to life during the Enlightenment, and finally, how they ended up hiding inside one of the most famous phrases. Jefferson's interest in this, it wasn't just casual, not at all. It was a deep, intellectual commitment. He didn't just admire the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus. In his private letters, he actually called him our master. He truly believed that this guy's system held the key to a rational and ethical life.
Now, the key to understanding Jefferson's whole take on this lies with a 17th century French priest, a guy named Pierre Gassendi. See, Gassendi had painstakingly pieced back together the true teachings of Epicurus, basically rescuing the philosophy from centuries of slander. So when Jefferson praised the system, he wasn't praising that caricature of indulgence. No, he was endorsing this revived, intellectually serious version that he had studied so closely.
To really get what Jefferson saw in this philosophy, we have to go back to the source. So let's head to Athens, around 306 BC. We're not going to some grand public building, but to a quiet, private spot on the edge of the city, a place known simply as the Garden.
The Garden was a sanctuary. It was intentionally separate from all the political drama of Athens. I mean, while the schools of Plato and Aristotle were right in the thick of public life, Epicurus and his followers, they stepped back. They built this quiet community focused on friendship, simple living, and deep thinking. And this was truly radical for the time. They welcomed everyone. That includes women and slaves as equals in this search for a good life.
So what was this good life they were all chasing? Well, it wasn't about constant thrills. The number one goal was a state called ataraxia. This is a really deep mental peace, a freedom from all the stuff that messes with our minds. Fear of the gods, dreading death, the stress of ambition. It's the calm of an untroubled soul.
And the second key ingredient was aponia, which is just a fancy word for the absence of bodily pain. So you put ataraxia and aponia together, and that's the Epicurean ideal of happiness. And here's the crucial point. It's not about maximizing pleasure, it's about getting to a stable, peaceful state by minimizing disturbance. It's about subtraction, not addition.
To get to this peaceful state, Epicurus gave them a really practical method, a four-part cure for all the usual anxieties. First, he said don't fear the gods. If they exist, they're too perfect and serene to be bothered with our messy world. Second, don't worry about death. His logic was really simple. While you're alive, death isn't here. When death is here, you aren't. It's something you can literally never experience, so why worry? Third, the things that bring real, lasting pleasure, like good friends and learning things, are easy to get. And finally, what's truly awful, like intense pain, is usually short, while the long-term stuff is manageable.
Okay, so if the whole philosophy was about tranquility, friendship, and simple living, how in the world did the word Epicurean become a synonym for, over-the-top, decadent indulgence? Well, the answer is in centuries of philosophical and religious wars that intentionally twisted the message. The popular caricature basically became a funhouse mirror version of the real philosophy. Where critics saw gluttony and debauchery, Epicurus taught modesty. Where they imagined this constant chase for thrills, he was all about the quiet pursuit of mental calm. And where they accused him of being selfish, he built his entire ethical system on the idea of friendship and community. The real heart of the conflict was metaphysical. Epicurus taught that everything, including our souls, was just made of atoms, and that when we die, those atoms just disperse. Now, for early Christianity, with its core beliefs in an immortal soul, divine judgment, and an afterlife, these ideas weren't just wrong, they were a serious spiritual threat.
And nothing shows how successful this smear campaign was more than Dante's Inferno. In his epic poem, Dante sticks the Epicureans deep in hell, and they're not with the gluttons or the lustful. No, they're in the sixth circle, trapped in flaming tombs, right alongside the major heretics, the ones punished specifically for denying that the soul is immortal. By the Middle Ages, the philosophy had been tried, convicted, and pretty much buried.
But it wasn't going to stay buried forever. So now we're jumping forward to the 17th and 18th centuries, the Age of Enlightenment, to see how this radical idea was dug up and carefully put back together for the modern world.
This revival was like a chain of intellectual handoffs, an idea passed like a torch from one thinker to the next. It kicked off with Pierre Gassendi in France. His work was then made popular in England by Walter Charlton. From there, its core ideas, like that all knowledge comes from our senses, had a huge influence on major philosophers like John Locke. And Locke's work flowed right into the intellectual river that fed the American Revolution.
And this revival was absolutely revolutionary. I mean, for centuries, European thought was dominated by one system, Aristotle's philosophy, all tangled up with Christian theology. That was the establishment. By bringing back Epicureanism, Gassendi put a serious, rational alternative back on the table. A whole new way to think about physics, knowledge, and ethics, all based on observation and materialism.
And this brings us right back where we started, back to Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. We can now see that hidden thread connecting an ancient Athenian garden to the founding of a new nation. And we can finally understand the real weight of Jefferson's words. You see, the ethical ideas that were revived from Epicurus didn't just influence Jefferson, they planted the seeds for one of the most powerful moral philosophies of the modern age, utilitarianism. That focus on happiness as the ultimate good, the whole calculation of pleasure versus pain, the idea that justice is a social contract for our mutual benefit, these are all Epicurean concepts, just repackaged for a new era.
So when Jefferson, a self-proclaimed Epicurean, wrote about the inalienable right to the pursuit of happiness, what did he really mean? Well, through this lens, it wasn't the right to chase fleeting thrills or pile up endless riches. No, it was the right to pursue ataraxia, a life of mental calm, free from tyranny, from superstition, and from unnecessary pain. It was the radical idea that a government's job is to secure the well-being and peaceful enjoyment of life for its citizens.
And that leaves us with one last thought. When we talk today about mental health, about finding a work-life balance to avoid burnout, or about the simple pleasure of just spending time with friends, we are echoing the ideals of the garden. The pursuit of a life free from chronic anxiety, that is the modern search for ataraxia. It seems this philosophy, after centuries in the shadows, is still hiding in plain sight.